It promised to power the future of flight. Instead, it became the engine that couldn't keep itself together. This is the dark truth about the Pratt Whitney JT8D. It was everywhere. The engine that powered an entire generation of commercial aircraft, from the Boeing 727 to the MD-80. Sleek, efficient, dependable, or so we thought. But behind the smoke and noise was a problem no one wanted to talk about. A jet engine that cracked, rattled, and sometimes just blew itself apart. In this video, we're unpacking the quiet chaos of the JT8D, how it helped shape the jet age, how it nearly broke it, and why it kept flying even when it probably shouldn't have. The 1960s were the golden age of commercial flight. Air travel was booming, passengers were piling into planes in record numbers, and airlines were hungry for faster, cheaper, and more reliable aircraft. That meant one thing: jet engines. Enter the Pratt & Whitney JT8D. It was sleek, it was powerful, and it was cheap, at least by aviation standards. When it first rolled out in the early 1960s, the JT8D was seen as the crown jewel of short to medium-range airliners. Boeing slapped it onto their new 727. McDonnell Douglas built entire fleets of DC-9s and later MD-80s around it. Even the US military got in line. And why not? The JT8D was built to be efficient, modular, and easy to service. On paper, it checked every box. It used a low-bypass turbofan design, quieter than the older turbojets, yet simpler than the high-bypass beasts we fly with today. Airlines loved it, maintenance crews respected it, pilots trusted it. But there was a catch. This engine was built for a different era, one where fuel was cheap, safety margins were slim, and the fastest design often beat the best one. The JT8D wasn't just a jet engine, it was a gamble with wings. Pratt & Whitney raced to meet demand, and that meant cutting a few corners. Some components were built for speed, not strength. Others were designed to be good enough, a phrase that should never describe anything bolted to a pressurized tube flying at 30,000 feet. At first, no one blinked. The engine performed well, but the cracks were already forming, literally. The JT8D was compact, designed to fit snugly under narrow wings and fuselages. But compact meant cramped, cramped meant hot, and hot meant everything inside was wearing out faster than expected. It was like running a marathon in a turtleneck sweater. Eventually something's gonna give. And when the JT8D gave out, it didn't go quietly. For a while, the JT8D kept its problems quiet, but not in a reassuring way. More like when your car makes a noise, then suddenly stops making the noise. That's not peace, that's suspense. It started small: hairline fractures, micro vibrations, odd signs of wear in spots that should have been stable. Mechanics noticed turbine blades losing their temper, and not in a fun way. Bearings were running hot, oil systems were throwing tantrums. Engineers began scratching their heads, then writing long technical memos that basically said, "This shouldn't be happening." But it was happening. The JT8D ran hot and fast. Its tight design, which made it great for short fuselages and lower drag, also meant heat didn't have anywhere to go. Turbine casings warped, mounts loosened. The whole system aged like milk. Pilots began reporting odd tremors, not the kind you feel during turbulence. These were high-frequency vibrations that made the cockpit feel like it was holding a power tool. Some joked that you could tell a JT8D was starting to go by how much your coffee shook. Still, the industry pressed on. The engines hadn't failed outright, so the thinking became, inspect more, monitor harder, write more service bulletins, but don't pull them from service. That would cost money. And then the real cracks started showing. Turbine blades snapping, cases deforming, engine shutdowns mid-flight. Some pilots even reported seeing smoke trails behind them. Never a good look, unless you're flying a Red Bull stunt plane. By the late 1970s, the FAA was taking notice. Reports were stacking up. Airlines were quietly padding maintenance schedules. Everyone was holding their breath, because the JT8D wasn't just showing wear, it was warning us. And soon, it stopped warning. Eventually, the JT8D stopped just whispering its problems and started screaming them. It didn't happen overnight. But one by one, the warning signs stopped being subtle. Engines were now failing mid-air, not just rattling or coughing, but full-on exploding in flight. There were engine fires, blade separations, and uncontained failures that tore through aircraft like shrapnel from a grenade. In one case, a DC-9 had to make an emergency landing after a JT8D caught fire right after takeoff. The passengers described the experience as bumpy, which is probably the most optimistic way to describe an airborne barbecue. But the most terrifying failures involved blade separation. A turbine blade breaking loose mid-spin isn't just a failure, It's a blender without a lid. High-speed metal fragments tore through engine casings, wing structures, and in rare cases, even the fuselage. Mayday, mayday, engine number 2 just blew. If you're still with us, don't eject yet. Subscribe now, because JT8D's worst days are still ahead. Some of these failures happened during takeoff, others at cruising altitude. Most of them came with no real warning. Maintenance logs might be clean, no unusual readings, and then, bang, silence, followed by panic. It reached the point where shutting down a JT8D mid-flight was just part of the checklist. Airlines quietly trained pilots for it like it was just another day at the office. You know, coffee, weather briefing, engine fire. And the FAA? It tightened inspections, issued service bulletins, but never pulled the plug. Why? Because grounding the JT8D meant grounding everything. By the late 1980s, the JT8D had a reputation. Not a good one, but an expensive one. It was in everything. The 727, the DC-9, the MD-80, cargo planes, military variants. Thousands of aircraft worldwide relied on that engine to stay in the air. So even as problems piled up, the idea of replacing it felt like pulling the fire alarm at a wedding. So what happened? Nothing. Airlines leaned into maintenance. They added inspections. They monitored blade life cycles down to the hour. And they prayed. A lot. The FAA issued directives. Check this part every 300 hours. Replace that bolt after 700. It was the aviation equivalent of taping a broken pipe and hoping the water doesn't care. Pratt Whitney rolled out newer versions. The 219, the 217C, more power, better fuel burn, quieter. But at the core, still a JT8D. And because most of them didn't fail, the industry shrugged. One failure per 10,000 flights? That's fine, unless you're on flight 10,000. Meanwhile, no one wanted to point fingers. Not the FAA, not the airlines, not the manufacturer. Because the second you say it out loud, that maybe this engine shouldn't be flying, you open a legal and financial black hole no one wants to step into. So the JT8D flew on, not because it was the best option, but because it was the one already installed. So you've got an engine that keeps falling apart mid-flight. You know it's a problem. The FAA knows it's a problem. The airlines? Yeah, them too. So what do? You slap on a band-aid, smile for the cameras, and keep flying. That was the vibe in the 1990s and early 2000s. Instead of replacing the JT8D outright, the solution became a long series of upgrades, mod kits, blade redesigns, new alloys, slight software tweaks, more sensors, better vibration dampers, and every fix came with a new name, a new promise, and usually a new price tag. Pratt & Whitney didn't ignore the issues, they responded. But each update felt like putting racing tires on a rusted-out station wagon. Sure, it might ride smoother for a while, but underneath, the chassis was still falling apart. To their credit, they did improve some things. Later versions of the JT8D, like the 219 and 217C, were significantly more powerful and efficient than their early ancestors. But those engines were basically Frankenstein builds, old cores with new parts duct-taped together and polished to look brand new. And guess what? Airlines loved them, because they were still cheaper than buying brand new jets with modern engines. Less fuel efficient? Sure. Higher maintenance? Okay. But replacing the whole fleet? Not a chance. Meanwhile, every time something went wrong, the blame game started. Everyone pointed fingers. The manuals were vague. The FAA guidance changed constantly, and every failure came with a report full of terms no one wanted to explain in court. It became a culture of fix what breaks, but never ask why it keeps breaking. You'd think that after all the fireballs, blade fractures, emergency landings, and pressurization nightmares, the JT8D would be a retired relic by now, rusting away in a desert somewhere with a "Do Not Start" sign bolted to the cowling. But no, the JT8D is still flying. Not in big commercial airlines, of course. Most of those dumped their MD-80s, 727s, and DC-9s years ago. But take a trip to South America, parts of Eastern Europe, or even some US cargo runs, and you'll still find those old birds lumbering down runways, engines whining like they're begging for retirement. That's because, for all its flaws, the JT8D is the cockroach of jet engines. It just won't die. There's even a small army of mechanics and parts suppliers dedicated to keeping them alive. These aren't just technicians, they're JT8D whisperers. And despite all the chaos, there's a strange respect for this engine. It's rough, it's noisy, it's stubborn, but it helped build modern aviation. It connected cities, fed cargo lines, and trained generations of pilots. And sometimes, that's enough to earn a place in history. even if it tried to fall apart on the way there. The Pratt Whitney JT8D wasn't just an engine, it was a bet. A bet that simpler was better, that cheaper could still be reliable, that cutting corners wouldn't come back to bite. And for a while, the bet paid off. It powered some of the most iconic aircraft of the jet age. It helped airlines grow, connect cities, and move millions. It was a workhorse, but it was also a time bomb. The JT8D's story is a warning that reliability doesn't mean invincibility, that engines don't have to fail often to be dangerous, and that pushing a machine past its limits just because it's cheaper than replacing it is a risk that eventually comes due. And it did come due in mid-air explosions, forced landings, shattered engine blades, and terrifying close calls that were only one checklist away from disaster. So, what's the dark truth? That the JT8D was never meant to last this long, that it kept flying because it was too expensive not to, and that in the end, it wasn't the engine that gave out, it was the system that allowed it to keep going. The JT8D taught us one thing: if it starts rattling, just turn up the cabin music. Stick around for the next story, it gets louder.